should have subtitles, should have a voice that should be heard. And I shouldn't have a weird echo, but I feel like I do. I don't know why. Pretzel also might be a little loud. Let me adjust that. Okay, Pretzel should be a little bit quieter now, and my voice should be louder than that. Okay. Oh, I know where I'm getting the echo from. It's coming from my PC speakers. Oh, that's why. Hang on 1 second while I fix that. Okay, that should fix the echo. Okay. I'm now getting an echo in my headset, but that's fine. I need to turn myself down. I'm a little loud in my own ears. Okay, I could just use the volume control. Hey, there we go. Now I have that done. Okay, hi, hello. Beginning of a stream is always a few seconds of technical pushing buttons, cranking levers. So we will try not to bump our mic. We will try to sit forward to make sure we actually talk into our microphone. And then we will start this. So, hi, hello, welcome to February. And sorry, scattered thoughts moving around all over the place. Okay, so what we're doing in February. Basically, this is our first month back after we've reached affiliate. Thanks yet again. I'll keep thanking people for that until the. Thank you, Tony. My keyboard is loud, but it adds ambiance to the stream. That's what I'm going to call it. In any case, it's also like the microphone is directly above. I'm gesturing like you can see it. And to do that, I need to actually click this button. So now you can actually see me gesture that the microphone is right here. Well, it's right here. And then directly below that is my keyboard. And directly below me on the screen is the chat. Hi, Tony. You're in the chat. And over there, I will eventually figure out directions on cameras which are flipped. Over there is LoreLink. What is a LoreLink, you may ask? Because, hey, this is the LoreLink channel. It's got the word LoreLink all over it, so you might be interested. What's LoreLink? LoreLink is our TTRPG GM toolkit. It is there to help you build your campaign. Hey, Mark, what's LoreLink? Tony, I'm glad you asked. LoreLink is a GM toolkit. It is used to build campaigns, allow you to quickly put together all the things that you need for a campaign. For example, this Doctor Who campaign I have here. We've got a campaign information. We can add players. You can put together a session. You can have events, locations, characters, creatures, villains, all of that. You can build those all out, then you can link them all together so that you can quickly reference what you need to reference, pull them all together, and be able to figure out exactly what you need when you need it during a game, rather than having to pull through a PDF or sort through notebooks or Google Docs or wherever you may have your information set up. It keeps it all in one place so that you do not have to worry about where you're going to find that next NPC, what accent you gave that NPC, what was the name of that small town you had at the beginning. So all of that is easily accessible for you inside of LoreLink, because we really want you to focus on playing the game with your players and less on playing the game of note-taking or bookkeeping or record keeping or searching for basically or search engine and things like that. We want all that to be available quickly and easily for you in one place, so that you can focus on the thing you're actually here for, which is to have fun and play a cool game with your players. So all of that leads into what we're talking about here today, which is it is February, which is Black History Month. So I decided, hey, let's pull a TTRPG which has been created by a Black creator. There are a lot of excellent ones of those, so I'm going to grab one of those. And B, another basically what also made it easier is the fact that I was looking for a particular basically superhero RPGs have been kind of popping up in my sphere of influence. Basically someone I'm working with is asking for a superhero RPG, so I'm getting back into the spin of that thing, basically those things. So that is what Tidebreakers is. Tidebreaker, not Title Breaker, which is what I have in the email. Whoops. I apologize. I put the wrong thing in there. I've updated some stream information just so the fact that that's updated, because I feel bad if I have that set up incorrectly. But so Tidebreaker is we've popped it up on screen right now. Tidebreaker is a cinematic tabletop RPG system that focuses on a couple of different interesting aspects. Basically, at its base, basically the way I would describe it, having read through it, is that it wants to pull influences from, obviously it's pulling influences from a lot of basically cinematic movies, you name it. Basically the author in fact actually credits at one point that basically TV tropes was really helpful in how they ended up writing basically a lot of this, because they liked all those action hero tropes and things like that. So that is what they focused on. And it's a combination of that with superheroes, and it takes a little bit of DNA from Feng Shui as well. You may remember, basically, if you have trolled our archives or have been a frequent listener of this channel, Feng Shui is one of my favorite RPGs for doing absolutely awesome, over-the-top, crazy, silly one-shots. We ran you can see, if I unhide it, down here there is Holiday 2022 Feng Shui 2. We ran a ridiculously silly adventure where Nazis had taken over the North Pole, and so it was our character's job to go up to the North Pole, basically kick Nazi butts, basically take down an evil clone of Hitler who is attempting to replace Santa Claus, the usual insanity of gunfire and basically crazy things exploding, things catching on fire, crazy stunts and all sorts of things. And Feng Shui is great for doing that. And so there's a lot of that kind of DNA in this game as well. Basically, the game is it calls itself a cinematic tabletop RPG, and it really wants to have those kind of moments. A lot of the abilities and things like that named in here, I have things like Showstopper or things like that. And so it's a lot of, hey, it's trying to be, I wouldn't say rules light. There are some complicated rules and other stuff in here. But it definitely wants, when you actually get down to it, it wants to be a relatively quick back and forth, superpowered stunts on one side being opposed by even more ridiculous stunts on the other side, things blowing up, things catching fire, and things like that. And so I figured how we could talk about today is, I'm going to crack open a cold one. It's Mountain Dew. It's not that exciting. Um, so, and we're going to basically, first I'll kind of talk about what superhero RPGs need and what they basically, they're an interesting subgenre of TTRPGs. Your basic fantasy RPG and your basic superhero RPG have some things in common. You're going to have basically the usual, I want to punch stuff. I want to not get hit by other things attacking me. You're going to have that, but the scale is going to be different. There's a lot of things which end up being just a little different between the two different systems, the two different ideas. That's important. Basically, it's important that if you're going to get into that you take that into consideration. So, like, the first thing is character creation is going to be different, because whereas everybody has basically fantasy RPGs, well, I'm going to use that as the baseline. Science fiction ones are relatively similar. Urban fantasy, you're going to straddle the line a little bit on this, but fantasy RPGs very definitely fall into they fall into genres and stereotypes and very easily categorized expectations. If someone says, "Hey, let's play a fantasy game," a lot of times you're going to end up with someone who's going to be up front. You're going to have the tank, someone who's going to take the hits and basically shrug through it. You're going to have someone who's going to deal a lot of damage, basically a blaster type, or basically your damage monkey, what's the phrase I'm looking for? That's just completely, essentially your character who's basically all about generating as much damage over time as possible. So that's going to be one of you're going to have one of those. You're going to have a healer. You're going to have someone who's going to want to keep the party up, keep the party moving. And then you're going to have probably a social person, the face of the party. And you're going to mix and basically you can mix and match in there, but generally you're going to end up with some mixing of those patterns. You're going to have a rogue who's going to do a lot of damage, but maybe also be the face. Or maybe you'll have maybe the mage will be the person who does a lot of damage. Basically, maybe it's a medic person who's the healer rather than a cleric. But all of those are going to break down fairly easily into categories. I mean, a lot of fantasy RPGs basically break things into classes because that's the easiest way. D&D did it that way, and so it's a really easy handle on that sort of thing. You have fighter, you have ranger, you have thief, and newer RPGs have gotten away from that, or they rename those, or they mix up those things. But generally, you're going to find those kind of things. Like even the I'm looking at it right here. Even the Blades in the Dark game, you ended up with some of those. You ended up we had the character that 20 was playing was definitely more of the leg breaker thug type. Tony's character was probably more of the DPS. DPS is the phrase I was looking for. There we go. You're more of your DPS character. Mike ended up with slightly more of a face, etc., etc. And so you still end up with those things. But superheroes, it's harder to classify things like that because superheroes are based on superhero comics, and that is which is somewhat of a misnomer because you use the phrase superhero comics and you're going to end up with people going, well, who's superhero comics? Are you talking Marvel? Are you talking DC? Are you talking Image? Are you talking Archie comics? Which is its own which could be its own completely different kind of range of things. But even if you're just going, I want traditional superheroics type things, so you're 90% on Marvel and DC because those are the big ones here in the U.S. Even though it's hard, basically it's like we want to be the X-Men. Okay, so the X-Men have I guess they have Beast, who's kind of well. There's also. I mean, who's the face of that group? Is it Jean Grey, or is it... I guess she's more of a DPS type, but some of her powers and things like that. you end up with basically everybody wants to, when they want to create their character, which is where we were starting on this, character creation's a lot more creative when it comes to superheroics. Just because of the fact that there has been such a wide range of comics, as it were, comics, graphic novels, whatever you wish to call them, that cover all sort of basically have taken the superheroic things and thrown everything you could think of imaginable on it. So you could have someone who's super fast, but they're also super strong, Superman. Or you can have someone who's just super fast, but they also have the ability to like time travel or go through walls or things like that. Okay, Flash. All right. Okay, you've got something, and then in the middle of that, you have people like, my ability is to shoot arrows really good. Thanks, Hawkeye. I guess you're here too. You have the ultimate super spy, Black Widow, or even basically just a really, really really intelligent guy who dresses up like a bat and has some amazing acrobatics ability, but technically, if he gets shot, he dies like everybody else. Batman. And basically, then you have like all of those, and basically, like sometimes you're like, okay, it's fine. We can set the power level, and you can say we're going for a more Batman, Watchmen level power level, where nobody really has superpowers, and basically we can just kind of we can deal with that, or we can up it to a higher level, and a lot of them use point buy systems and things like that to balance all of that. But so that's going to be your first decision when you start running a superhero game, is right at character creation is, hey, so what power level of game are we playing? What type of game are we playing? Is it going to be a low power guys, basically vigilantes, basically people who are just decided that there's something wrong with the city and they're going to go take care of it, and they happen to punch real good. And basically, even in that aspect, like that's kind of Feng Shui kind of handles that low level where you've got some basically like some powers, people are a little bit more durable than usual, they hit a little bit harder than usual, they're a little bit more accurate than usual, they can do things people normally can't do, like dodge bullets and things like that. Like that gives you an example of just how crazy superheroes feel. Like a low-powered person can dodge bullets, and that's just kind of an assumption. Which is that's already an insane superpower to start with. But you have to make that decision, and then if you scale it up, if you want to do an Avengers level, or an X-Men level, or do you do a Justice League level? And those are all different levels inside of themselves because, and they have mixes inside of them. Like Justice League, you've got Superman, superpowered man from Krypton who can basically tank just about everything. Flash, guy who can run around the world and basically in a blink of an eye can vibrate himself so fast he can go through walls. We've got Wonder Woman, who's basically essentially a Greek goddess level power of basically just a goddess level of power. And then you've got Batman, who can't fly, can't run fast, but has a bunch of ridiculously cool gadgets that let him keep up with the rest of them. You have Green Arrow, who basically whose power is to shoot things with arrows. And basically then you have Martian Manhunter, who can basically can shapeshift and change all sorts of other things about his body, etc., etc. And you're like, oh, okay, Batman can't fly. He falls with style. Batman throws himself at the ground and misses with surprising regularity. On the Avengers side, you have something similar, which means basically you have, you've got basically Black Widow. Basically, we're going with the movie Avengers, not basically because that's one that a lot of people has been more popularized in media, and they're the ones whose names I could rattle off the top of my head. You got Black Widow and basically Hawkeye, which fall into that low level power level. You've got Captain America, who ups it into the basically beyond human normal, or possibly at human maximum, depending on how you want to look at it, with some cool gadgets. Then you've got Iron Man, who's got even crazier cool gadgets, which enable him to basically get into a knockdown, drag out fights with bigger things. And then you've got two ridiculous powered things. The Hulk, who who literally can basically fall out of air, fall out of flying buildings, fall out of basically flying objects, and land in fields and get up and brush himself off and keep moving. And Thor, again, you're back into your god territory again in terms of power level and basically amount of damage they can output and things like that. Magic items and crazy things like that. And all of those end up in the same party, as it were. And so when you're building out a superhero campaign, you start off at that level of how balanced do I want this to be? And you have to realize that sometimes that answer is going to be maybe it's not balanced. Maybe somebody really wants to play Green Lantern, and maybe someone really wants to play Batman. And you have to, basically, as a GM, you're going to have to balance that out. You're going to have to think about, okay, I've created, I'm going to create situations that challenge Batman. I'm going to create situations that challenge Hawkeye and Green Arrow and those lower level. And I'm also going to create situations that also challenge Superman, that challenge Wonder Woman, that the Flash can't just run really fast and get past. And there's a couple different ways of handling it. Some systems handle it by making the non-mortal ones have super-powered the non-super-powered ones have super-powered level non-physical stats, aka Tony Stark and Batman have super intelligence, and so super genius and super inventions and things like that. We max out all of those stats, and we allow them to invent stuff that lets them function on the same balanced level as the Supermans and Hulks and Thors of their group. That's what a lot of systems you'll have point buy systems, and that's how they'll deal with it. Is they'll point that out. So basically, if you spend a lot of points in buffing your stats up, that means you're not buying gadgets, you're not buying social status, etc., etc. Superman has got superpowers, but because he dumped all his stats in that, his social stats are all terrible. He's just a great big Boy Scout who basically couldn't lie or convince anybody of anything. Isn't the greatest detective in the world, and basically, even though he's a literal prize-winning journalist, but we'll ignore that for the sake of this argument. And is also basically lives in a simple apartment in Metropolis because that's all he can afford. Because his job doesn't pay super well. He's not super rich. He doesn't have those advantages, which the Bruce Waynes and Tony Starks, they've dumped all their points into. Basically, they've dumped points into that, so they've got the charisma stats and things like that. That's one way to balance it. The other way to balance it is to basically just let the adventure kind of ride as it is, and basically take your cues from the comic books and things like that, and do a little bit more. This involves a lot more planning on the GM part, and basically being aware of what your character's strengths and weaknesses are. Sometimes literal, like Kryptonian weaknesses for kryptonite and things like that. And figuring out, okay, how can I have an adventure that plays to everybody's strengths, but at different times or in different ways. Like the Avengers fight scene is an interesting, like that big famous fight scene at the end of the first Avengers movie, is a good example of kind of a fight where every player feels like they're contributing, but they're doing it at different levels. Your low level fighters, your non-powered fighters, like Hawkeye is definitely contributing to that fight. Like he's he's blowing it. Basically, he's only taking out single units with his trick shot ability, but he uses it to ground the big bad, because the big bad is basically, he can take out the device the big bad is flying on, because he's able to get the drop on him, surprise him, because he's not considered a major threat. Black Widow can basically help to take down the doomsday device, which is happening. Yes, this is spoilers. This is spoilers for Avengers 1 ending. If you haven't seen that yet, if you haven't seen Avengers 1 and you don't have a problem with watching a Joss Whedon movie, because it is very definitely a Joss Whedon movie. Joss Whedon movie. And you're wanting to run a superhero campaign, watch the Avengers movie. It is a good base for you to learn from. So basically, like, Black Widow can take out the Doomsday device, and basically Captain America can battle large numbers of the individual bad guys which are showing up. Because he's got a little bit more strength and things like that, and so he can take care of more of those. But so he's down at the street level doing that, but he's also doing things like protecting civilians and things like that. Like, he's being put into a situation where he has to use his a little bit more powers and strength to take out, to help to fight bad guys who are targeting innocents, etc., etc. So he's still contributing to the fight. He's still doing a strong part of it, but he's not doing as much damage as, say, Hulk and Thor, who are battling the giant beasts, or basically Tony Stark, who's both battling the giant beasts. He's also taking care of the big bad, basically being a face and interacting with the big bad, and basically getting information from him, tricking the big bad, etc., etc. Putting the big bad into a situation where some of the other strengths of the party can come into play. And basically you also you could also throw a bigger threat at Iron Man, or Thor or Hulk, that you couldn't throw at basically Captain America or Hawkeye without the players just going, we can't handle that. What are you talking about? But you can throw it at that particular character and be like, aha, here is something that is still equally important. Like Captain America saving the individuals, basically Black Widow shutting down the Doomsday device, etc., etc. All of those are important things, and they all are going to be moments that are going to make your players go, yeah, we did something, I contributed, but they aren't necessarily at the same power level as each other. But you've thrown enough stuff out there that everybody feels like they're contributing, and like the big ending of the thing is Tony Stark's heroic sacrifice at the end of Avengers. You can that is a challenge relatively unique to Tony Stark that Hulk couldn't take care of, that Thor might have been able to take care of, but lacks the understanding really to take care of that last problem. And so it gives that character one last, just say Stark, please. Okay. Give Stark Iron Man, Tony Stark, Iron Stark, Iron Tony. Oh, because every time I say, yeah, true. Every time I'm saying Tony, it's making you twitch. Okay, cool. I'll just say Stark. My apologies. I'm driving my moderator crazy. They're like, what do you keep talking to me about? I'm not paying that much attention. So basically, it's a problem that is uniquely Stark is able to handle because of the fact that, because of their character and things like that. And at the end of it all, you have a fight scene that works out relatively well, because everybody gets their cool moment in their, Captain America gets their cool moment where they get to basically be the team leader and basically use their situation and strategy to be able to point out weaknesses and things like that. And so all of those things team up together to basically essentially help build an epic fight scene at the end that doesn't feel like it leaves anybody out. And so that's one kind of thing you have to basically kind of have to think about when you're doing basically superhero level stuff. The other thing you have to think about is like scale, and scale and powers, like giving people the ability to use their powers, and what scale that means that you need to have things operate on. Are you throwing entire armies at them? Are you throwing fleets of vehicles, giant doomsday devices? Are they fighting through, basically, is the scale of combat in basically just a small battlefield? Like in D&D, 90% of the time, if you're having a fight, it's going to be, things are measured in feet or meters. And you look around, you're like, oh, okay, we can basically, your far away effects are 500 feet or things like that. That's considered beyond the normal range of the battlefield. So you've got all of that, basically, whereas a superhero fight could be you're fighting through city blocks, you're getting knocked down, drag out fights through buildings and things like that. And that is what's basically, that is what is going on. That is the that's the scale you have to think about. So your maps have to be bigger. And that means that while it's relatively easy to draw up a 500 meter thing, when you're looking at bigger sizes of things, you're like, okay, maybe you need to make things more generic. You need to have districts. So like, this is the theater district over here. This is the here's the arts district, the theaters districts over here, the fashion district, the financial district. Basically, here's downtown. It's got large skyscrapers in it that people can be knocked into. Over here is here's the football stadium. It's over here. It's taking up this section. And here's your first easy tip. Google Maps is your friend. Just grab a city you're interested in. It can be the city you happen to live in if you want to ground it in something that, if it's a local game and all your players are familiar with the downtown of the nearby large city, great. Grab Google Maps, use that, and that way it has more oomph and more effect on the players when you say, yeah, basically you get blasted through the Sears Tower, and everybody knows exactly where that is and what that looked like and what that effect is and things like that. Or and yes, I said Sears Towers because I grew up in Chicago and I refuse to call it the whatever it is now, tower, or if it's assuming it hasn't changed again, because that's its name, darn it. It's Wrigley Field and Sears Tower and Wrigley and Comiskey and Sears Tower and things like that. Willis Tower, like that just has the same rings to it as Sears Tower. But in any case, but basically, if you're downtown Indianapolis, there's I'm going to say Chase Tower, which again proves the point that I don't like renaming buildings, because Chase Tower is now the Chase is big company. You think I know this guy? Like I know the name. I know the old names. I haven't even been living in Indianapolis that long. Salesforce Tower. Yep, there it is. Salesforce Tower, the Regents Bank building, or crashing into Lucas Oil Stadium, etc., etc. Assuming you're running a modern day one. Basically, superhero games tend to be more modern day, just because that is the default setting for most comics. Is graphic novels and things like that, is sometime around the modern day, plus or minus 10, 20 years. And so using Google Maps is great for getting a easy map of an area like if you want to set it somewhere else, if you don't want it to necessarily be in your own backyard, as it were, or you don't live near a major city, you can get maps of, you can get incredibly detailed maps of uh, Pittsburgh or New York or Seattle. I've had a number of games which are run in Seattle, um, which friends have used Google Maps to be like, okay, here's where you generally are. You can see these buildings, et cetera, and it gives you a good idea of basically basically what's in an area. You can pick random types of, you can pick buildings that basically, you can look up a building which is similar to what you want, give it a different name, so you're not basically dealing with using actual names if you don't want to. But you can go through all the, you can use that as a resource to create your maps, to generate your scale that you need without you as a GM having to put a lot of exhaustive work into figuring that out. Because again, a lot of the work in running a superhero game is going to be power levels and interactions, meaning the fact that you're dealing with basically how does this shape-shifting power interact with the super strength power, interact with this lightning bolt power, basically flying versus super jumping versus all of those things. And it's a lot of creative improv. You have to, like, it's going to vary from system to system, and I'll get more into basically, we'll talk about Tidebreaker here in a bit, but a lot of basically, no matter what system it is, basically, a superhero game is always going to be about creativity because they're based on, again, graphic novels, comic books, whose hallmark is a lot of creativity being put down on paper and a lot of creative solutions to what look like on paper no-win scenarios or tricky situations or things like that. Like, basically, your characters are basically put into like hostage scenarios, and basically villains are holding cities for ransom or captive or bombs or things like that, and then the superheroes have to show up and basically save the day from this no-win situation using all their powers in creative ways. And you as a GM have to A, set up situations that these players can use their creative powers, and then B, resolve what happens when those powers are used on each other. And so you have to you're going to want to do a lot of your work. Basically, you're going to want to have your work kind of set up ahead of time, which is where Lorelink comes in on that. Basically, when you're creating a superhero type campaign, I would suggest that you may do a little bit more work than you normally would for a fantasy campaign so basically, it's setting up your locations. And again, basically, you don't like I was talking about with Google Maps, you could use Google Maps to give you maps and things like that. In your job as a GM is you're going to add interesting locations that you're going to plop down in the place of existing ones. So even if you're making up your own city, if you're making up Metropolis, for example, or Gotham, and both of those are different versions of New York. If I was running a game in Metropolis or running a game in Gotham, and I wasn't particularly concerned with being 100% accurate to the comics interpretations of it, because I'm sure by now people have there are enough Marvel omnibuses and things like that, not Marvel, DC omnibuses on those two particular cities that you could almost literally get actual city maps for them. I'm going to start from New York, and I'm going to use that. Basically, Gotham is very definitely New York, basically with a dark coat of paint on it. With the bridge, basically, it's got those bridges, which are very important for trapping people in the city or keeping people out of the city, et cetera, et cetera. And so New York and Manhattan Island gives you a lot of that can give you that same kind of experience, that same kind of map. But I'm going to add different locations in there. Like if I'm going to add the, obviously if I'm dealing with Gotham, I'm going to start with, like, we'll throw Arkham Asylum, and I'll detail out that information, and I'll create that, and then I'll drop that on my map. And basically what I'll probably do is I'll probably start with Gotham as a major city, and then I will actually go to Arkham, and I will shift Gotham into... I will put Arkham Asylum under Gotham. Now any notes about any effects or anything like that, which are going on in the larger city. So, for example, if I'm using... Basically, if something is happening and I want to make note of it, I've got these child notes instead of the fact that basically preventing visibility above 6,000 feet. Headphones. My headphones sometimes like turning off at the amount of music I'm playing is under its threshold. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's a minor problem. But now basically, if I'm having this effect, basically either it's an effect that I'm having for a particular situation where a supervillain has done this, or if I'm running a game where this is a city, I'm running a more steampunk-esque city, where basically smog covers everything over 6,000 feet. I'm going to put that in the notes under my major city, rather than having to remember that and write that on every child object. So now if I go to Arkham Asylum, I can switch this to that, and I can see deadly smog covers the city for an invisibility of 6,000 feet. So that's the sort of thing. Basically, I'm going to create locations. I'm going to create events, which basically are things I'm going to want to have happen throughout. But basically, and villains are going to be another one of your big things in terms of they're going to be your basically what you kind of pivot the entire campaign around. So let's go ahead and start talking. Let's go from the more generic, and we'll kind of. Basically, we're about halfway through our time slot here for today. So let's focus in a little bit on the RPG, or the TTRPG we're covering today, which is Tidebreaker by Nick Baker. We actually pulled that up there. So basically, available on his website is a quick start guide. You can also purchase the full RPG as well. I would definitely say, basically, if you're looking at running a TTRPG, basically a superhero game, always basically look for these quick guides, especially for superheroic ones, and even from almost any RPG. Always look for a quick start, just because the fact it's going to give you a little bit more. But superheroics, let's focus on the Tidebreaker and Lord Link. Maybe. But basically, in terms of you're going to want to, this is a system which you know what level what type of game your players want to play. You understand that your players are going to want a more super powered one, and so therefore, basically they want high power level. So you want to deal with that, and maybe they're like, no, we really want to play either DC Comics or Marvel Comics. And so in that case, you're going to want to probably either grab one of the many Marvel comic TTRPG ones, or you're going to grab one of the one of the DC ones, and use that one. If your players are like, okay, we're actually wanting a little bit more of a darker type system, we want closer to, basically want to play 90s Wildstorm, you're probably playing Champions. Champions is you can do everything in the kitchen blender as long as you're willing to do the math to set it all up and get it balanced. Basically, the big names in the superhero space are Champions, Mutants and Masterminds. Basically, Mutants and Masterminds, Villains and Vigilantes is that one. Wait, math? Yes, just a little bit of math in Champion. And your other big name in that space is Champions, Mutants, and Masterminds. There's one more, which is probably it's going to tell me there's math in TTRPGs. Aberrant is another big name in there, in their Scion, basically their Scion system. It's one it's one basically it's a superhero game that I mostly ended up playing. You can basically I have seen so many different articles and discussions and things like that on how to get your kids to be interested in math, and that is, hey, play TTRPGs because, hey, boy howdy, if you basically the more basically your older school RPGs, you can basically get your kid to sit there and have to sit down and figure out, okay, you rolled at what? Here's your number. Here's your bonuses. Google, I wasn't talking to you. And basically add all of those up, and cool, now you decide whether or not you hit or miss, and you need to do this relatively quickly to keep the game going, so because you want to keep playing. And so, hey, basically it's a great way of getting kids to basically to focus in on that sort of stuff. And so Champions, Aberrant, and basically Mutants and Masterminds are your bigger systems, which are they're definitely your more generic superhero type systems. They want to be able to handle everything. They want to be able to handle basically your Justice League level, and they want to be able to handle your Wildstorm level. They want to handle your Watchmen level, and they even to a little extent, basically to a smaller extent, Archie comics. But really, if you want, well, depending on what era of Archie comics you're wanting to run, old school or basically older Archie comics, 60s and 70s Archie comics, you're running Toon. Just grab Toon, play that, have fun. Riverdale, you're probably playing a different system entirely. You're probably more of a actually, I don't know if there's a system that can handle all of the insanity that is Riverdale. Probably going for an urban fantasy type system. Maybe Fate, maybe what's the other one? It'll come to me later. In any case, so basically Tidebreaker is interesting from the standpoint of like I talked about earlier, it is more of a feng shui style system, and it has a lot of its combat mechanics are derived around those ideas of it wants to be a cinematic gaming system. So it has things like momentum, which is the ability to basically, when you miss something, it's a currency you spend to power your abilities, but you get that currency. Basically, one of the many ways you can get that currency is via missing. Like if you're attacking and you miss, you generate momentum. So it's a system which is designed around, hey, basically don't just turtle. We want you to actually keep pushing. And basically keep pushing, keep attacking, because if you're attacking, you're generating the momentum, which means the fact that you are able to use your abilities more often, etc., etc. So from that standpoint, it's wanting to be much more of an action-oriented system. It wants you to be worried about, basically not worried about, basically, but thinking about making your actions more interesting. Basically, there's things called stunt bonuses and things like that, which are, if you describe your actions well, then you can get an additional D6. There's also basically one of the things I really liked was I want to look at the exact name of it. Assuming I can type. I have the full PDF on my. I've got my full PDF here, so I can referencing quicker than scrolling through the quick start. But in terms of basically they have things called showstoppers, which basically showstoppers happen if something you do is so awesome or amazing or ridiculous or over the top, or it affects your table to get to the point where someone cracks up or is clapping or is laughing, basically, boom, that action becomes more powered because of the fact that basically it's obviously an awesome over the top thing, and suddenly your dice rolls basically your dice rolls get more powerful. All of those actions get amped up because of the fact that you're leaning into the system. You're leaning into the basically like the one of the the base mechanics of the system is keep it heroic. It's the idea of the fact that this is meant to be a hopeful, heroic, basically RPG where you're gonna get knocked down, but you're gonna get back up again. I know what I just said, and I know what went through his head, and I apologize. Um, you're going to eat, you're going to take the punches. You may lose, but you ultimately will continue again. Basically, get back up and keep pushing, and you'll be able to. You eventually will overcome the obstacles, and basically succeed because basically, and so it is meant to be a heroic system. It's meant to be an action system. Things are meant to be exploding and basically having fun. People are meant to be being knocked through buildings, and basically you're meant to then pick up lampposts and throw them at people, etc., etc. Like that's again, basically much like I talked about, Feng Shui is very obviously an influence here for do things over the top, and the GM is then supposed to reward you for that. Is that a balanced system? No. I mean, obviously, it's like if someone cracks up or laughs, your rolls become more powerful. Basically, it means the fact that if you're trying to min max, you're wanting everybody to do. Basically, someone is always going to crack up or clap them, even if you just say, I punched the guy. Someone's going to be like, yeah, woo, you clapped him, you punched the guy. Oh, I clapped. That's cool. He gets all his bonuses now. It's not balanced, but it's a game that is meant to be played basically with your friends for fun, to have those interesting, exciting moments and then reward you for them. Like the example they give throughout the book is they like talking about basically the obvious example of you're in a bar fight, and basically you can start off with I shoot the guy at the bar. Okay, I'm going to slam him. I quickly slam the magazine into my gun. Basically fire a string of bullets, riddling across the floor until they basically slam into the mook and throw him back into the bar. And then you can go up from there and be like, this guy don't stop, I fire up, and I'm shattering glasses and things like that, and alcohol is going everywhere. And as I go back, I'm like, drinks on the house, pal. Basically going into that kind of die-hard level of things, and then when you get the superpowers involved, you're like, I'm going to vibrate so hard so all of the beer bottles explode and basically send shrapnels of glass hitting everybody hitting all the mooks cowering behind the bar, and then the alcohol, then Firestarter, my other friend is going to throw something in there which is going to ignite it all and basically catch it all on fire, and now the bar's on fire. Yes, I did just look at you, Mike. But so all of those things are basically going over the top, continuing, and things like that. Innocent. But all of those is. But that is what the system wants to encourage you to do. You have basically things like Ignite, which basically your sixes, your sixes get reroll. Basically, if you roll a 6, you reroll failures. If you roll a 6 or a 5, you reroll failures. Ignite 3, 6, 5, or 4, reroll failures. You have botches, which reroll those things. I will say basically there's probably my two biggest, the two somewhat gripes with the system that I've run into so far looking through it, are the system is a little bit complicated in terms of dice pools and things like that. It runs into the problem that every superhero RPG eventually runs into, which is if you really want to accommodate a lot of effects and things like that, you have to have a system that gives you, which is at some nature complicated. So while it's at a base level, it's relatively straightforward. It's a D6 die pool system. There are a lot of different. They're like, well, we want things to make things basically make you more likely to hit. So that's what ignites are and things like that. So ignites help you re-roll stuff. Basically, you have stunts, which are adding dice. You have being able to push your basically being able to push stuff and things like that. The momentum pools and things like that, which can add stuff to your dice numbers and so basically make it more basically and add stuff, but only so many times, and dice can only re-roll so many number of times, and you end up with this kind of stacking system, which basically is going to end up basically kind of gets a little cumbersome, and it means the fact that as a GM, you really need to sit down and read the system ahead of time, and you probably want to uh, prepare sheets for your players in terms of, hey, this is what you're looking at. Here's what you need to keep an eye on, and I'm going to want you to focus on just these things for your character. Yes, there are 6 million things out there, but you really only care about these key things, and here are key features that everybody's going to need to keep track of. It's not quite the basically, hey, you know what, it's Feng Shui, we're going to roll 2 dice, we'll take basically one higher, one lower, we're going to add some bonuses, and we'll come up with some numbers if you're doing something cool and add those in, and then we'll check against the target number and we're good. And we'll move on. That's the entire system. That's all we're going to do. This is like, okay, let's make it a little bit more complicated. Let's make it a little bit more, basically, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's reflect all the different powers and things like that we have. So my other fault with this game is that basically it does need a little bit, basically you need to go into this PDF and be prepared to kind of look, basically the quick start actually might be a little bit better because I was looking at the full one. The organization in the base game is a little bit more scattershot than I would like. I would prefer it to be a little bit more straightforward. Like this one here, character creation is right at the front. And then it's abilities, and then jobs, and then it's basically talking about some of the meta resources of hope and doom, and then goes directly into combat and moves on from there. This is basically a much kind of cleaner thing where the rulebook gets into some other more complicated things, which are cool and add some of the really interesting features for the game, but they're kind of scattered throughout, and you're kind of going, wait, where is this system explained? Oh, it's explained 2 or 3 chapters later, but we talk about it earlier on, etc., etc. That some of that stuff we cleared out, but I believe I saw on Nick Baker's Twitter that he is looking at releasing a second edition of this sometime soon, and so hopefully some of those things will get cleaned up. Because it's got some neat things. So let's talk about some of the neat things which are in this system. Some of the other neat stuff. The other big thing that this adds, which is something which I think is kind of key, and a lot of systems, basically a lot of superhero systems don't take as much advantage of this, is that this is a much more community-driven superhero RPG. It wants you basically what it posits and basically what it has is it starts off with a session 0, and this kind of works really well with lore link and the location things which are put here. It starts with you're going to want to create your community that has a various different locations, and each of those locations has key things in them. Basically, they have key figures. They have key figures. They have problems, which the PCs are there to they have issues that the PCs are there to deal with. Some of which are going to be related to the overall plot. Some of which are going to be their own individual things, which the players may want to address on their own. And some of them might be stuff which is tied into players' backstories and things like that. And they have resources that those areas can provide to the players, so that the players can basically like, oh hey, I'm playing a cybernetic type character. This area of town has basically electronic shops or things like that, or I'm playing a character who basically deals with basically gets injured and so basically needs to be patched up, or this section is where the hospitals are and things like that. And so it's dealing basically, it starts off from that session 0 of, hey, here is the community that you're looking, basically, that you and your players are involved in. Here is the living, breathing, basically, a lot of times you can end up with kind of a disconnect between a superhero, basically, depending on how you want to do it. Like, this is, but basically, if you're wanting to ground your heroes and give them more goals or things like that, give them something to fight for, this is an awesome idea for, hey, here's how you tie down, basically, here's how you give the superheroes goals, here's how you tie your characters into the world they're inhabiting, so that you can force those super heroic types of situations on the players. Like, basically, Captain America is very much tied into New York. Basically, he spends a lot of his first movie dealing with New York, growing up in New York, basically things like that. And so when New York is threatened in the Avengers movie, it helps. Basically, Captain America is more likely to be like, oh, I need to save these innocent people because this is my town. This is basically, while Stark is more focused on dealing with basically the overall threat and things like that, and saving the city as a whole. And like Thor is just there to beat things up and just basically to deal with his brother, etc., etc. Basically, Captain America has a tied in. He's there to defend the neighborhood. He's there to rescue that waitress, get those people out of that building, save the basically, because this is his town and he needs to save these people. And so when you're building out locations like this, you're basically, so you're building out basically a neighborhood, basically you can call it like something like Taylor's Row, and basically then you can build out some of the you can build out residents, you can build out issues and resources, and you can build those out in here during your region, during your session 0, and you can tie some of those some of these things you're going to just kind of create. You're just going to be like, yeah, this section, the city has a corrupt alderman, which is forcing the people to forcing them into poverty, or maybe it's more sinister than that. Maybe there's an evil cult in this neighborhood, which is basically attempting to open a portal underneath. And some of the stuff is stuff that you as a GM are going to come up with. Some of the stuff is the stuff some of the players are going to come up with, and some of it's going to be this game. The Tiebreakers basically allows you to put some more social type issues in your game, as well as big superhero style stuff as well. So your superheroes can be faced with problems that they can't necessarily just punch the right guy to take care of. Maybe they need to deal with, okay, what's going on? Basically, why are these people being treated like that? What's going on? What do we have? Basically, how do we actually help these people in a meaningful way? And that means the fact that later on, if there is also a demonic portal being opened up under the school, and you have your big fight scene, now the fact that when you introduce you've built up these residents which have lived in this area, like the old cat lady who lives there, whose husband died in the war and has been living there with her cats, and you needed to help her move stuff, or help her find one of her lost cats early on, or things like that. Maybe the cats were being kidnapped by the evil cult and things like that, and that tied into the greater storyline. But you got the cats back for that person, and they became a character that you created, and now they're a part of the town. So when demons are rampaging through the street, you can throw a quick, and they're punching somebody, and something happens where you're using some of the there's doom and hope in this game, and doom is a way of kind of pushing players into those comic book type of, oh no, bad things are happening type situations. You have a name to put on those. You have oh no, it's Granny Fairsmith, who's in trouble, and your characters hook into that and can be like, oh, we have to save Granny Fairspith, because we all know players love basically even minor NPCs that you put a little bit of effort into. Players love grasping onto them, and they love building on them with you. They love adding their own little twists and things like that. Like someone to go back and maybe they're like, yeah, I've been going back every week and helping Granny Fairspith with their cats and helping them basically build those out. And so now basically if you threaten Granny Fairspith, that character in particular is super motivated to basically throw themselves into the line of fire or do something or up their game and do something a little bit more heroic and things like that, because again, this is a super heroic game, and you basically, the super part is part of it, but you have to remember that the heroic part is also part of it, and you need to provide your players that opportunity to do those heroic things to feel like they're actually playing the superheroes, no matter what power level they're at. Superman, basically, like one of Superman's most moving scenes is that Superman punching Joker through, or basically punching the Joker in that one, basically in Injustice. It's Superman talking somebody off of the ledge because their doctor got stuck in traffic, and basically their therapist got stuck in traffic, and Superman shows up and has a heartfelt conversation with them. That's All-Star Superman. But that's one of Superman's iconic moving scenes, because it's Superman, even with all of his powers and things like that. Like, yes, he could just pick that person up and move them away from the ledge, but instead it's the, hey, I need to deal with this person as an actual person. And so they get to be a hero beyond just the I punch good hero. And so with Lorelink, basically, that kind of session zero stuff is stuff that you're going to want to write down. Is stuff you're going to want to have on hand, and it's going to be stuff that you're going to want to be able to quickly reference, add new things, subtract new things. So, basically, things that will help you out with that. Creating a template, that has a Gotham City location. Let's go ahead and save that. I'm going to want that to always be be a period of Gotham. Okay, I'm going to add some custom fields of some of those things which I need to add for residents. And then issues. Resources, I'm going to have all of those. So, residence issues, resources. Perfect. So now basically I want those there so that when I create a new location, I'm going to attach that template to it. I'm going to lock that in there. Pull that Smithfield still. Lock all of these. So now I've created Smithfield. I have those custom fields are right there for me. So I have I know the fact that I could just add things for issues, residents and issues and resources, and I don't have to re-add those custom elements or crowd them all into one description box. I can have them all broken up into those separate sections, just like that. And then even more important, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk, and someone's going to be like, yeah, maybe Granny Fairspith is their aunt or something like that, or their grandma, rather. And so they link to they bring them up, or you created them on the fly, and so you're going to want to add them in. And so you're like, oh, I forgot to create them. let's go ahead and create a new character. And then boom, I've got Granny Fairsmith. And now I can just add them in like that. I could also associate basically, I could also associate them as a game object. Basically, if I just want a direct link to them, doing it basically having it in the list here. I can add a basically I can have a little bit more detail if I want to have that in the location rather than having it in the basically if I can describe their relationship to the basically to the area. So okay. Yep. Often see. Things like that. Just throwing some notes in there. I can have those there. Now I have those associated with the notes, so that I can just as easily build all of those in, and so I don't have to think about, okay, where did I put basically where do I have all those things, and I can update them things if I need to, basically just as quickly just by going through here, because that's going to be important as well. The ability the fact that you're going to want to throw new people in there as your characters interact with these things. Like if you create an issue of basically we talked about basically grabbing this one. The book has this one as an example. Like evil cult opening portal to the high school. And so now you've got basically, eventually players are going to interact with the evil cult. And so you're going to want to create a tag for the evil cult. So you can tag, so you can have the evil cult operating in various areas. Then maybe you'll want to create a new villain, who is the high priest of the evil cult. And so you're going to want to basically maybe you'll tag them as evil cult, and you'll add them under the villains, things like that. And it's again, like I talked about, the fact that a lot of this is creative, a lot of it's going to be on the fly. Some of this stuff you're going to want to just sit down and do ahead of time, to build all this out, to give your characters the living world that they want to deal with. And some of it's going to be just stuff that's going to happen in the middle of a fight. Someone even like the evil priest is going to throw random students towards the hell portal, and you're going to create that random student really quickly so that you can keep track of that person so that they can show up later and be grateful, or maybe they're depending on what type of game you're running, maybe they're grateful for the superheroes rescuing them, or maybe they're unsuccessful at rescuing some of the other ones, and this person's bitter about that fact, and they're going to start working with the bad guys to get revenge on the superheroes that they feel are responsible for losing their high school sweetheart getting thrown into the portal and being sacrificed, etc., etc. And all of that's going to happen relatively quickly and on the fly. And so that's what LoreLink is good for, is let's quickly create all of those things now that I have them so that I can put them out there. And so a lot of so that's something I really like about what Tidebreaker does, is it has that system built into it. It is a key part of the system. It's not something which is the GM is, you could probably come up with this, or basically it's buried under player options and things like that. It's closer to more of a fate. Dresden does something similar in their book series, where the players get together in the first, basically in their session 0, and they create the town that your wizard or supernatural beings are that they live in, and like places and things like that. And basically you can tag them and things like that with the fate tagging system. But it helps to build that city out ahead of time and build a connection. It's one of those things that basically it's something I've considered. Basically I feel like some of the games I've run, especially some of the pre-builds and things like that, kind of lack. And it gets better. Basically, some of the more better ones have those city building aspects built into them and then you end up with like the Kingmaker series from Pathfinder, basically Pathfinder First and Second Edition, Extinction Curse with its circus, basically the superhero, the epic one. Wrath of the Righteous, there it is. Wrath of the Righteous does basically you end up partway through the book series ending up with a city, and some of the greater interactions you get is with basically building that city up, and it borrows some of the Kingmaker stuff, which is why it basically where it came from, but it allows you to populate that city with people and things like that, and then basically NPCs that your characters can latch onto. Like I was trying to say earlier, NPCs are great. Basically, players are great at latching onto NPCs and building up backstory around them. Whether it's something you intended, where basically, yes, here's your villain, and this villain is always basically does various things behind the back, basically, and your players start building up what this villain is doing beyond what you may have even planned. They're like, aha, that must be the villain's plan all along, as they must have set us up to do X and Y, and you're over here on Lorelink going, let me add that note real fast so that I can keep track of that. So, villain was responsible for evil cults getting materials. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. We just did it. Yeah, yes, they were totally responsible for that all along. That was my evil plan. And now you can have that note in Lorelink and you can keep track of that. Or maybe it's a minor NPC that you throw into the background of a scene because your characters are like, hey, I'm gonna go sit at a random table, and you're like, who's at the table with me? And you're like, okay, it's a generic dude wearing a hat, a woman in a dress, and it's a slightly drunk green-skinned guy. They're like, oh wait, the drunk guy? I want to take a let's find out more about this goblin guy. What's he up to? What's he doing? What's his backstory? And you're like, okay. And suddenly he's now the mascot for your party, and everyone wants to know where he is at all times, and et cetera, et cetera. And actually, I love the fact that the system actually has something kind of, you can kind of build that into your cities. There's something called a Beacon of Hope, which is essentially, hope is a currency in the game in terms of letting you get through hard times and situations and basically fight through troubles. And there's usually in every area, there is something that all the residents treasure, and consider kind of the heart of the area. And sometimes it could be a statue, it could be maybe it's a coffee shop, a business, or the example, of course, they give is that there's a cat. Basically, it's a cat that everybody in town loves. So basically, so if you go and you come and you just sit down and you pet the cat, and basically you'll get a hope for that. And so I love the fact that it gives, again, you can take that mascot character for an area suddenly has a system mechanic attached to it. A minor one. It's not super deep, but at least it's there, and therefore you can basically your players have something to build off of. And basically, again, the cat's in danger. Boy, howdy, your characters are going to throw themselves into the fire to rescue that, to save that. And so that is going to be that's going to be a motivating factor and things like that. And so again, Tidebreaker is it's an interesting system. It's basically the math and things like that. All superhero games suffer from either you have to be ridiculously simplistic, basically you're going with Feng Shui style or Toon style of, it's up to you as a GM to navigate everything and balance it on your own, or you end up with an overly complicated math-heavy type system where you have damage and mega damage and things like that. If you're dealing with things which are like, okay, this person can punch a guy really hard, but that guy over there can punch a tank really hard, and those are two different levels of damages, and we need to keep them separated, and therefore we get exponents involved or multiply times 10, etc., etc. And basically things like that. And basically, so in this one, stumbles and basically wants to be a little bit more not math heavy, but ends up kind of falling into that same trap of, oh, we have to have a system for that. Oh, we also have to have a system for that. Oh, okay, that system has to involve this system and this system as well. And okay, we need something to cover this situation, et cetera, and it kind of it falls into that trap. But basically, it's got some great ideas, and I love basically I think it works great with Lore Link is basically that location system that's kind of at the heart of it, where basically everything is about the community and what difference your players can make to the community, and setting your goals in that community so that your players can see the change that they're making. And I think that's a great way of doing a superhero system. And I think it's something that more superhero systems should kind of dig into and look into. All that to say, it's 6:24, so basically we've kind of reached the end of our talk time here. So I will go ahead and do my usual wrap up type thing. So things basically. So this was the first one. Basically. So this month, basically, we're doing mostly planning this month. We're not going to have a play session as of now, unless if the mood strikes all of us and we end up with free time, maybe we'll end up playing something TTRPG related. But right now, we're mostly doing planning sessions and things like that. So today we covered Tidebreaker. I'm looking at also covering another interesting scenario, basically another interesting system called Hardwired Island, which is a free time. Yeah, pretty much. Which is a post-apocalyptic cyberpunk corp system, but it's kind of it takes place on a space station and things like that. So it's it's an interesting take on looking at how do you build that out without it just being a yet another dystopia, etc., etc. And so I'm looking forward to planning that one out. We'll probably throw some video games in there at some point, and there might be a few other surprises along the way. But the only so if you want to and also I believe Mike, who ran a couple of sessions last month on planning out some Pathfinder stuff, maybe back to plan more of those games out, or maybe doing his own, maybe planning out some interesting other systems and things like that. We'll see what those are. So the question, of course, is, as always, if you're interested in those things, how could you find out more? Well, first of all, if you're interested in LoreLink, which is the whole reason we're doing all this, is to show off LoreLink and talk about different RPG systems and how they work with LoreLink and what features and things like that LoreLink offers. So if you want to know more about LoreLink, you can go to our website, www.lorelink.com. You can read more about that. You can check and find out about that. LoreLink is LoreLink is a GM toolkit meant to help GMs build out these complicated worlds and systems and things like that, and quickly capture all of those, all those unique and interesting things like that, get them into a system that allows them to cross-reference them, link them together, so that you're not because otherwise you're dealing with either you've got spreadsheets with all of these different locations and events and characters and villains in them, or you've got them in a notebook and you have to flip back and forth and pages and things like that. LoreLink lets you take all of that thing and put them in one place and have a quick and easy place you can just jump between all of them, quickly add new stuff, remove stuff, link stuff. All of that is just in the system already. You don't have to worry about that. So LoreLink is great. That right now, we had a successful Kickstarter. We're currently in early access with limited ways to join. If you're interested, if you're wanting to get in on the early access in the future, we will have some opportunities for that. We'll have some exciting things to talk about, things like that. So basically, you'll have to listen to that. We are looking at taking, basically going from basically early access, taking all the input that we get, and then moving from there into basically moving into a full release. We are hoping, I'm knocking on wood, hoping basically that will happen later in this year, but no promises, because development is a funny thing, and we don't basically, and we're getting feedback from users, and so we're not going to just be like, here's the hard date, no matter what actually happens, we're going to do this. If the users come back and say, oh, that feature doesn't work, or we really need this feature, et cetera, we're going to work with our users to get basically to get an exciting, interesting product. And basically, if you want to know more about if you want to know more about our streams that we're doing, you can follow us on our social media. We have a Blue Sky, which, hey, Blue Sky is now open for everybody. You don't need an invite anymore. It's basically, it's all available. So if you're fleeing other social media wastelands, basically Blue Sky is now available. That is our current primary. Facebook and Instagram are secondaries that we have. So basically, it's a way of getting more recent updates on things. Our newsletter is a way of getting, basically, if you don't want to deal with the morass, which is social media, you just want information about one thing summarized up and condensed into one monthly or maybe twice monthly email that you get. Cool. Sign up for our newsletter. That will take care of that. If you want to find out more, if you're like, hey, these streams are cool and I want to know more about them, first of all, awesome. Thanks for saying that. Second of all, we've got YouTube, basically. So if you want to catch an archive of this or previous streams we run, like I talked about the Feng Shui game. I talked about the, I keep saying Feng Shui. There are 6 different ways of pronouncing that word, depending on how westernized and terrible you want it to be. I always default to the ones I heard originally when referring to the game system. But we've got YouTubes of those. Basically, archives of those game systems are available on our YouTube. Archives of our past streams are also available on there as well. So you can check those out. If you want to find out more about our, basically, you like these streams, and you want to basically find out when they're going live, in case we go live on a Monday or Tuesday or some other time that you basically weren't expecting it, you can follow us right here on this YouTube channel, on this Twitch channel right here. And that will give you a notification when we go live. If you really like what we're doing here and you're like, hey, I want to support that, we now basically, because of all the hard work people did, we now are affiliate. So basically you can get a subscription to our channel, and that will give you access to some of our cool, fun stuff like channel points and the ability to spend those on various polls and other stuff we will have that will pop up over the course of the year. And it also gets you cool emotes, which are being designed by our awesome in-house artist, etc., etc. So all of those things come from being a subscriber. If you want to take some of Jeff Bezos' free Twitch money, which is basically if you have an Amazon account, you link your Twitch account. If you have Amazon Prime, you link your Twitch account. You get a free thing which you can support streamers with. So hey, spend basically if you want to give it to us. Awesome. That's where we'd be eternally grateful. We appreciate that. And basically, if you're watching this on YouTube at a later date, basically like and subscribe our videos on there, and you can basically those do awesome things of boosting us on that, because the reason why we're doing all these videos is to boost knowledge, to provide videos that provide, hey, this is how we're using it, here's who we are, here's what we're trying to do. Hey, basically, if you like what you're hearing, come support us. So all of that to say, basically that pretty much puts us at time. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. And we will catch you back here likely next week, next Tuesday, for probably Hardwired Island. Check all those things I just said. They'll let you know what I actually did. So catch you all later. Thanks for watching.